Good afternoon. Here we have a quiet little motel, tucked away off the main highway, and as you see, perfectly harmless looking, when in fact, it has now become known as the scene of the crime.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of the Sunday Matinee. Tonight's main topic is going to be Psycho, a film that is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, actually just last Tuesday, the 60th anniversary of its original theatrical release. So tonight I have with me a classic film expert. Returning to the show is Dea Osborne. Yes, hey, of everyone who's been on this show, you are the one.
Giant fan. We'll go with that one.
Okay. Giant fan. That's good enough. So welcome back, Dea. So we're going to start out with some news. A lot of this is going to be sort of box office and COVID related stuff because that's the important stuff we need to be dealing with. So interesting development with Tenet. I had mentioned last week that in areas where Tenet was playing in movie theaters, Warner Brothers was not allowing it to be released at drive-ins because probably due to the technical limitations of a drive-in theater sound system, et cetera, et cetera. But Tenet has now been released to drive-ins in the Los Angeles area, which seems a little counterintuitive given how bad the air quality has been here on the West Coast. If any of you are watching this and aren't on the West Coast, we've been on fire for a while and it really sucks and we've got smoke everywhere. It's terrible. So going to a drive-in, I actually wouldn't recommend doing right now. So right now, just don't go to a movie theater if you're in an area with bad smoke and because of COVID. So when it opened, Tenet got a solid 20 million. Its opening weekend. It has dropped to 6.7 million for its second weekend. It definitely helped that they had a holiday last weekend. But I believe this may factor into a decision that Warner Brothers has made regarding Wonder Woman 1984. It was originally set to come out in October and has now been delayed to December 25th. I believe this has a lot to do with Warner Brothers anticipating another wave of COVID hitting in the fall as flu season kicks in, as well as I think they're downplaying Tenet's performance at the box office. I know a lot of analysts have said 20 million was a good start, but to drop from 20 to 6.7 is rough. And that's even after they added theaters. So that's really rough. They want to release few movies at a time right now and make sure that they have legs. And if Tenet can't have legs to get through September, that's going to be a rough sign of things to come for the other big releases this fall. Universal followed up by delaying Candyman into 2021 on an undisclosed date at this time. So I have a feeling that we're going to be seeing Black Widow, No Time to Die, anything that's set to come out in October or early November, probably get pushed back. Can't say for sure, but it's not looking good for the fall movie season. Any thoughts on that, Dea?
Yeah, no. Tenet, I didn't read the review on purpose because I don't want any spoilers, but it didn't have great stars in the Guardian from UK. So I think they are hoping they're gonna figure something out immunization wise or something by December. Also, if you're going to risk getting COVID or whatever, I think if you're not doing stellar reviews, people are not going to be so inclined to walk in the door voluntarily. So maybe that's why they opened it up to the drive-ins, of course, not knowing that all of these fires were going to be erupting all over the place. So I'm betting the December 25th, they're going to push a lot. I'm betting there's going to be a lot actually coming out in December. It's the ones that we're supposed to begin with, and then batching all of the stuff from spring forward, in hopes maybe they can piggyback and make some money back there. I don't know. It's hard. I can't say that I would be comfortable sitting in a movie theater probably, well, for sure the rest of this year. I'll be doing all of my film viewing from home, sadly.
I will admit that on last week's show, I talked about this with Sarah. I said that if we don't see a lot of, breakouts, COVID breakouts happen because of movie theaters, I would consider going in late October, early November to catch Bond or Wonder Woman or Black Widow. But again, it's really difficult to say, and they made those movies all just may get delayed anyway. So
the drive-ins are awesome. If we had them, if we had more of them, I only know of like 2 here, and then of course our weather being what it is, if it starts raining and never stops, we can't enjoy the film in that way anyway. But it really was a good idea to do some releases that way.
Yep. And then the problem, of course, is once it does stop or start raining, drive-ins become less lucrative again, too, because then you have to keep your windshield wipers on through the whole movie, which means you have to have your engine kind of running and you're draining battery. It's not once you get into the fall, winter, drive-ins it's just hard, especially if we actually get that one big snowstorm again. That seems to be a thing we get now. Yeah, climate change is real, everybody. It's a thing. It's crazy. So yeah, that's the bad news for the week. Yay. So I wanted to get a special message out. This is something I've wanted to tack on at the end of a couple episodes, and I keep forgetting because they run long and we get really, really into stuff. So this has been a big year for the Black Lives Matter movement. And when you think Black Lives Matter, I also, as a movie person, think that Black art matters, and not just Black art. Black, Indigenous, people of color, we need to be recognizing a lot more and viewing a lot more of their films. And I have a small list of directors. I wanted to put the focus on directors because we all see what's in front of the camera, but we don't always put a focus on the people behind. So some of the people that I think, if you are not paying attention, you should be. Ava DuVernay for Selma. Bong Joon-ho. I mean, come on. I've been pushing Parasite on Facebook all year. If you haven't seen Parasite, it's a gem. Ryan Coogler, and not just Black Panther, everybody. Steve McQueen, and I don't mean the actor. There is a director. 12 Years a Slave, Widows. Taika Waititi, and again, not just Ragnarok, everybody. We can't just be supporting their Marvel movies. Guillermo del Toro, an obvious one. Shape of Water, Hellboy, so many great films. Alfonso Cuarón, in my opinion, and I know I'm going to get some crap for this, directed the best Harry Potter movie. So, and that's the third. Yeah, the third one. Yeah, the third one. And I know a lot of people are going to give me crap for that, but that's okay. Get out there and support these directors, support BIPOC producers. And if it's not in the English language, I just want to say subtitles are your friends. If you do not have an inability to read subtitles, they are your friends. Get over it. They're a thing, and it's much better to watch. It's going to be much better to watch a film in its original foreign language with the subtitles than watching it dubbed into English. I've known that my entire life from watching the dubbed Godzilla movies. They're so much worse. So yeah, and also again, I want to give a shout out to the firefighters here on the West Coast because it's been absolutely dreadful. Down in California, if you've seen the pictures from there, it literally does look like Blade Runner or like Dune, or it is a dystopian hellscape. Thankfully, here in Washington, we can still see outside, but it's still pretty bad. The air is basically unbreathable. So thank you to our firefighters for helping us to get through this nightmare. Okay, so I wanted to.
Wait, can I add a director in? I really
absolutely.
love Pedro Almodovar. I freaking love his work. Always have loved his work, and I believe it's Venice Film Festival is still going. I believe the head of that one voting this year is Kate Blanchett, and that got some. It's getting some word of mouth right now. He has a new piece out, along with a lot of other pieces that are being spoken of quite extraordinarily. I can't wait until we can go to the Grand and see them. Really looking forward to them all.
And he directed Y Tu Mama Tambien, right? Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Casa de los Bebes and Volver. Actually, Penelope Cruz, in my opinion, has done her finest work there. She kind of tended to get cast as sort of, exotic, pretty woman, whatever, here. But over there, she's quite lauded as a heavyweight, and I've enjoyed her work through him quite a lot.
So yeah, I know we're going to be talking about one of the most famous white male directors of all time, but everyone get out there and, well, don't get out there. Stay home. Hop onto Amazon or Netflix or whatever. I know if you have Netflix, Alfonso Cuarón's Roma is on there. So, there's some great films out there by these wonderful directors. So I wanted to move on and do just a fun little bit here before we jump into Psycho. I brought up the Criterion Collection a couple of times on the show, and I'm going to ask this to a couple of other people who are on here. First, I should probably explain for those of you who don't know what the Criterion Collection is, it's this amazing organization that actively seeks out important films and gives them the best possible home video treatment that they can get. They clean up the picture. They get the best possible source for the sound. They find as much of the archival features as they possibly can. The little booklet inside usually has a great essay on the film. They're a little on the expensive side, but that's repaying the premium for the best possible version of a movie you're probably going to get. There's going to be a lot of foreign films in there, a lot of older films. They're particularly good at getting their hands on, for the US, films that are in the public domain that studios don't want to buy up and give a good treatment to, or sometimes they do get some more recent films, and they get some interesting ones. I have the 39 Steps on Blu-ray. I was introduced to the Criterion Collection, I think, through Life of Brian is on there. Back in the Laserdisc days, the early Bond films were part of the Criterion Collection, which is, I think, very interesting. The Godzilla films are in there. Goofy as they are very important. I question their decision to put The Rock, Michael Bay's The Rock, and Armageddon in there, just because it's Michael Bay, and he's a pretty ridiculous director. But yeah, it's a great, and Alfred Hitchcock, like I said, 39 Steps. A lot of his European films are in the Criterion Collection. I want to ask you, Dea, what are 5 films that you would like to see in the Criterion Collection, whether or not they're, big films that you can easily find now, or something that's really, that you only find, at your like silver platters?
Yeah, I'm going to go with some of the bigger ones. I also have a correction. Y Tu Mama Tambien is Alfonso. It's not Almodovar. I wanted to make sure on that one. Yes, so I've got a few of them. My personal favorite movie of all time is The Best Years of Our Lives. And I have it in every incarnation that's ever been released except for Laserdisc. And I would love to see that have a big, beautiful release with some extra essays and all kinds of great stuff. Singing in the Rain. Actually, their musicals are pretty far down there on how many they have available. And Singing in the Rain's got to hit up there. I really love Gosford Park. They also do not have any Coen brothers. So Barton Fink, I'd love to see that. And It's a Wonderful Life is one of my all-time favorites. Pretty much any capper you can put in there and I'd be happy with it. And a lot of cappers in like the Library of Congress, as it freaking should be. So yeah, those are my go-tos, I think. What are yours?
I will confess, I didn't have too much time to come up with a top five, but one of the ones I would include actually would be Psycho, because of how much it changed how we view movies, particularly at the movie theater. The only problem is movies like Psycho or some of the ones you mentioned, particularly Singing in the Rain, probably will never become part of the Criterion Collection, because those big movies that are iconic, that do have big studios attached to them, those studios know they can keep milking those films for years to come, and don't necessarily need to license them out to Criterion or any one of the other smaller home video labels.
Kind of deal, yeah.
As long, because yeah, like Psycho and Singing in the Rain will sell well no matter what. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would add Psycho. See, I would also actually add like the original Frankenstein with Boris Karloff, I think, because that obviously, or Bride of Frankenstein, one of those two. But again, that's Universal Picture. They're going to box that in with all of their big monster releases. They're never going to give that one up. But yeah, like, I mean, of modern movies, I would say I find it curious that Wes Anderson, always, like, all of his films end up in the Criterion Collection.
Is there a marketing involved in that, do you think?
I don't know. It could just be that he and Criterion have had a good working relationship. I know his earlier films weren't as widely marketed, like Rushmore or Royal Tenenbaums. I think it took Fantastic Mr. Fox. I think it took him doing an animated movie to really start getting the backing of big studios and big marketing, because Grand Budapest was much better marketed than his earlier live action films. But I think because he had that good working relationship, he'll get those Criterion releases. I don't have any of his Criterions because I just go out and buy. I went and bought Grand Budapest the second it came out. I bought Moonrise Kingdom the second it came out, and then it would be like 2 months later, Criterion would announce it's coming, and be like, well, shoot, if I'd have known that earlier.
And Criterion, when they were first starting to release, were really, to me, they were really obscure, more indie films and foreign films. I didn't know most of them, when I would look through the catalog, I'd never even heard of most of them. And now there's so many more classic collections being uploaded into it. And so I'm wondering if they either bought up a bunch, or if people are voluntarily giving it in as part of an archiving situation, or what is going on there. Do you know who owns Criterion? Like, are they a part of it?
Yeah.
That's
actually a good question. That's something I can look into.
It just seems like there's an awful lot of really well-known classics that have been added in the past probably 5 years. That every time I go to like Barnes and Noble and I hit that Criterion wall, I'm like, oh, son of a gun, they've got that out and that out. I mean, just open my pocketbook and take it all. It's quite a hit, and my wish list is insane on my Amazon wish list, and it's all stuff I've already owned, but it's like, I want that essay, I want the cleaner transfer, I want the deeper blacks, I want all the things, the reasons why you buy the Blu-rays, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the Criterion Collection, everybody, and those are the movies Dea wants. I got a couple that I want. I may come back with more at some point down the line, but yeah, and they actually do have a streaming channel as well. Um, so if you, I know we've talked a lot about too many streaming channels on this show, but if you can afford another streaming channel and you want to look at stuff that possibly wouldn't have considered before, that is one to check out.
I had it for the 5 seconds that TCM had their other streaming channel. I can't remember what it was, but it was that and Criterion married together, and then it died.
I remember that too. I can't remember what it was called, and yeah,
and they would do a couple of the vaults, the TCM vaults, but I still don't have cable, so I still can't watch freaking TCM. That was my one way of getting into their archives. Bummed me out.
Yeah, it's streaming services and cable are a rough market, constantly changing. So we'll see what all this is like in a few years.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to our main topic for the night, Psycho, September 8th, 1960. I'm going to divulge the plot of this film, and this is a massive spoiler alert. If you haven't watched Psycho and you are interested in watching Psycho, just leave now, because this is the film that really defined spoiler alert. Back in its day. If you haven't seen it and you're good to stick with us, here's what happens. So, Marion Crane is in love with Sam Loomis, but he's divorced. He's paying his alimony. He doesn't have any money, and they have to meet secretly at hotels. It's not the most healthy relationship. And Marion, by divine providence, has $40,000 fall into her lap. $40,000, which she's supposed to deposit at the bank for her boss. And instead, Marion decides to take the money and run and go to Sam. On the way, she has to evade the police. She has to talk her way into getting a new car so that she can, she's not a very good thief. Let's just say that. But as she's almost there to Sam, but she's driving. It's stormy outside. She ends up driving off of the main road and right into the Bates Motel, where there's a kind young man, Norman Bates, who, he talks with her. He gives her dinner, but it sounds like Norman has this overbearing mother that you don't get to see. You don't see mother. You hear her. You can see her silhouette in the windows of the house that overlooks the motel. And they talk about the traps that people fall into. And Marion realizes that she has fallen into a trap and she needs to go back and fix this. But she still has to get through the night at the Bates Motel because it'd be terrible to just drive back in the middle of the night to Phoenix. So, feeling, relieved of her burden, Marion takes a shower and washes away all of the terrible stuff, all the bad. In the midst of that shower, a figure enters the bathroom, pulls the curtain aside, and is obscured in the darkness, but it appears to be a woman. And she stabs Marion several times with a knife, while Bernard Herrmann's majestic score plays underneath. The plot has changed. The protagonist is dead about 45 minutes into a 1 hour and 50-minute film. All of a sudden, Norman Bates is now our hero, so to speak. The person that we are going to latch onto for the rest of this film. Norman goes back down to the motel after his mother returns to the house, and he cries, "Mother, blood!" He goes back, he finds Marion's body, and dutifully, to protect his mother, he takes the body puts it into the trunk of Marion's car, and sinks the car into the swamp out behind the motel. A week later, Marion's sister Lila travels out to California to find Sam because Lila needs to know where Marion is. Lila has been followed by a private detective named Arbogast. Arbogast goes out to all the motels to see if he can find Marion, and he comes across the Bates Motel, and he gets suspicious, particularly when Norman mentions his mother. Arbogast returns later to the motel to question Mother, and it doesn't go well. So Norman has to hide another body, and now Sam and Lila are very suspicious about Norman in the motel because the detective had told them that's where he's going. So Sam and Lila go out to the motel, and through some effective deception, they're able to distract Norman while Lila goes up to the house to find Mother. And that's when we finally discover that Mother, who is down in the fruit cellar, has been dead for 10 years, and it is merely her rotted corpse. And Norman has been dressing up as Mother and committing these murders. And then in the final scene, a psychiatrist explains the whole thing away very conveniently in 5 minutes. So that was a pretty big thing for 1960. Pretty huge. We're going to go back to the decade before, the 50s, because Psycho was a very new territory for Hitchcock in terms of, I'd say, content, but not in style. The 50s, I would say, it was an era that was defined by his films with Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, and Grace Kelly, and films that generally had upbeat endings. Wouldn't you? I mean, apart from Vertigo, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. The 50s definitely had it had a tonal change significantly from the 40s, that's the Hitchcock's section that I prefer. Just post his UK work. But yeah, the 50s, it was the movie star era, which by the time he hit Psycho, he's pretty over. He just wants to tell the stories, I think, and is less interested in the personalities being the main key. He wants the story to be the key. And I appreciate that about the casting of this, with one exception, which was his great way of bringing people into the movie. So, Vivian, or Janet Leigh.
Yeah, the 50s is actually the era I know best of Hitchcock. North by Northwest is my personal favorite. But it definitely is. It's definitely, and not just for Hitchcock, it really was. The 50s was the era of the movie star and the studio system. And, actors were now contracted to do X number of films for a studio. Directors did the same thing. Or you were contracted to work with a specific director for a number of films, which is why Vera Miles had to do Psycho. Then he had Vertigo, and he tried to do something different with Vertigo, tonally, than To Catch a Thief or Rear Window or North by Northwest. These were films that all had great drama and suspense, but Vertigo is just depressing. It really, I can only watch that movie maybe once a year. It hits your brain super duper hard. And we look back on it now, and a lot of people say that it's, his best film. But in 1958, Dea disagrees, and that's fine. But in 1958, critics hated it, and audiences didn't respond to it. It was a bomb at the box office at the time. It took North by Northwest to sort of get studios back on board with Hitchcock. But as you said, Hitchcock was tired of the studio system. He was tired of big budget films. He was tired of Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart. He wanted to do a horror film. And everyone said, you can't do a horror film because they're all bad and cheesy. And this is very true. With very few exceptions, but I think possibly with the exception of, the early Frankensteins, horror films had become incredibly cheesy. And I love them for that. But, you can't have, the studio's philosophy was you can't have Hitchcock do something like that. Hitchcock's name is, it's prestige. He's the best. You can't have your best director making something that is that bad. So, so we had to go low budget. That was the only way that he could sell it. And that's why it was black and white. A lot of people say it was black and white because of the gore. And that's not true. I bet that if he could have gotten away with color, he would have. Because that probably, for its time, probably was one of the bloodier films that an American studio was releasing. I would say. Because I don't know, even you get into the 60s with Bond, and Bond, he's killing people left and right, and they're not that bloody.
But they're not, yeah.
Like gore really wasn't, and gore in color, really bad gore, really wasn't a thing until the 70s for American cinema. So I think if he could have done Psycho in color, he would have. I definitely think it was a budget thing. What do you think? Do you think that'd be an interesting film to see in color? I mean, we kind of have, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. I'm not into the color of it. I like the black and white for the cinematography purposes. I feel like the blood would be very different. You would be experiencing it very different if it was red. For instance, when you're watching it as he tracks it in the bathtub, starting to go down the drain, and you're just watching it in clouds and clouds and clouds go down, and it's a very kind of poetic, weird thing that you're obsessively watching going down the drain, and I don't know if that would quite be taken the same way. I don't know what his intentions. I had heard once upon a time he didn't want it red because he didn't want it to be about that, but that could be a story of a story of a story for all I know. I don't really know. I'm glad it's black and white, frankly.
I like it too in black and white. It works. It does harken back to an older. It harkens back to his older work and to older horror movies in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
I feel like he's the one guy who really elevated it from the B movie serial, two reelers before the main event kind of deal, to a respectful thriller and Hitchcock, that Hitchcockian, which is in a dictionary, what that means. And he elevated that. It still doesn't get the awards. It still doesn't get, today, like Saw 24 is never going to it's never going to win an Oscar. That's just never going to happen. And I don't think that it should. I think it's a different audience base it's going for. But I think where Hitchcock elevated it and was really telling the story and letting his actors and his cinematographer do beautiful work. It's very, very little text, very little lines, huge pockets of time where you're just watching people move and do a thing and watch their faces as they do it. And I love that. I love that. And almost nobody's going to let you do that these days even.
Yeah.
So that art of giving that space to the actors, of giving that space to the cinematographer, it's more than just a slasher film kind of a deal. And it's more than a monster film where it's just, we just want to watch the monster work. We actually want to follow all these little tiny beat movements to find out, is he going to get away with it or not? And you sort of cheer for him in a sick way. Like when the the car starts sinking in the swamp and then stops, you have a moment of, oh shit, he's not, what's he gonna, and then it starts going down again. And then you realize, I'm cheering for a serial killer, like what is wrong with me?
I particularly love the way that Anthony Perkins is also chewing on the candy corn in that scene, and you can almost just have to watch his mouth. You don't even
Yeah,
have to
and
watch his whole face. It just
the
like
tension
pause.
in his jaw
Mhm.
when he's thinking or he's caught in a moment. He does so much beautiful work in this. I cannot believe he didn't walk away with an Oscar, let alone wasn't even nominated. That just, I can't believe that.
I think that has everything to do with the critics at the time being absolutely stuck up, because yeah, it was
Oh yeah,
Psycho was in the same boat as Vertigo. Critics hated it, but audiences loved it, thankfully.
yeah.
So
I mean, I think the cinematography, I believe the music, and Lee got nominations, but I think that's it. Everything else was out to dry on that one.
So we're going to go kind of back in time a little bit. Now that we've talked about the story of Psycho, we're going to talk about someone who, after doing a little bit of research, may or may not have had an influence on Norman Bates and the story of Psycho, and that's Ed Gein, a genuinely terrible human being who, believe it was in Wisconsin, on a farm in Wisconsin. He was just sort of reclusive. I don't know if he had that same sort of infatuation with Mother that Norman does, but he definitely, it was confirmed that he did commit 2 murders, both of them women, and he confessed to basically being a body snatcher. He would dig up graves, and I will not describe what he did. I will simply say that he was supposedly an inspiration for Norman Bates. He was definitely an inspiration for Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. So if you've seen either of those movies, you kind of have a sense of what Ed Gein did to people. I say it may not be tied as much to Psycho because I've read that Robert Bloch, he started writing the book Psycho before Ed Gein was arrested, and his story was all over the newspapers. But he did add in a connection to Ed Gein once that story was out. So there is that connection, but I don't think Norman Bates was supposed to originally have been based off of this real life person. But you're going to see it pop up a lot if you're into this film. That it's a name that's just going to pop up as a real life inspiration. I believe there's a book about Ed Gein called Deviant, and they call it Deviant, like the true story of Psycho or something like that. And it's like, maybe not, but it's fascinating, but it's also, once you know who this person was, it really actually makes Norman Bates seem tame. Like, really, especially in the movie. I know in the book, Norman is also a little bit more violent and graphic, but I think a lot of that too has to do with what we've been talking about, is Anthony Perkins.
Yeah, the character was originally more a little rotund and a little slovenly, and that I really like the switch of casting to Perkins, the good-looking guy. It brings more that Ted Bundy feel in that good-looking guy. There's no, you feel sorry for him, give him a helping hand, kind of gosh, oh shucks, gee feel, and then he's a freaking monster. And I think that's an excellent switch for the audience to have to go through.
So, Dea, what is your earliest memory of watching Psycho?
Well, I was never into violent movies when I was a kid. I grew up on the 1940s and 50s musicals. That was my bang. Didn't have any cable or anything like that, so it would just be whatever I went and bought or rented. And so I came to it pretty late. I was a teenager before I saw it because I assumed it would be too violent. I did watch it on Halloween when I finally saw it. And of course, I knew the shower scene. I knew there's, so many things you can't escape knowing, the lines that everybody knows. Every boy's best friend is his mother, that kind of thing. I was bowled over by how contemporary the acting was on the part of Perkins. He does beautiful, subtle little hesitancies, um, small gaffes, tells that you later, when you watch it over and over and over again, you can see moments when Mother pops out, and then when he takes ownership again, you can see his embarrassment. You can see the I shouldn't walk into your room, so let's go eat in the office. There are so many beautiful little the candy, which was his idea, Bergen's idea on filming day. It was so amazing. And then the shots, the extreme close-up work. There's so many shots where you were just on, like, the whole face doesn't even fit in the frame. It's so close. And how jarring that is, and how uncomfortable that is, and how well Hitch uses that that voyeuristic style over and over again, and how many moments were in silence. I really enjoyed. So I picked up quite a lot of it. The things that I loved today in the first watch of it. I couldn't believe how contemporary it was, actually, I think. And how scary, but it didn't cross the line where I was having, nightmares or something like that, where some movies these days, I'm like, I don't understand why people enjoy watching that. That's just grotesque and literally horrifying, because that kind of crap happens. So why would you want to watch that? It was still a film. So it was still art, and I could enjoy it. What was yours?
Well, I'm going to tell two stories, and I wish I had your first experience. I will be very honest with that. First, I want to tell my dad's, because his is kind of humorous, because of course my dad was alive back when it first released, and he caught it at the drive-in. So I don't know if he ever got to see the original version, or if it had been cut by the time that he saw it, but he saw it at the drive-in with his brother, and they saw it with another Hitchcock film. I can't remember which one, but he was pretty young. Gosh, 1960. So if he had seen it in its original run, my dad would have been, it couldn't have been his original run. Nope. My dad would have been 8. That would be bad.
That would be bad.
So he must have seen it on he must have seen like the re-release in the mid 60s or something. But my dad slept in a room that was sort of a loft, and you could see down the stairs to the back door. And so, of course, it's a drive-in. It starts, around about at dusk. So they get back home sometime after midnight, probably 3, 4 in the morning. And my dad said that he did not sleep that night, that he just, his eyes were on the back door because that's what he could see. And he was just afraid that Norman Bates was going to come through that door and stab him, which is probably the experience of a lot of people back in the 60s who were first seeing this film.
Yeah.
Because it was a very new concept, something this violent and this horrifying. My first experience is actually entirely my dad's fault, because, and this is where it gets bad, I don't remember how old I was when I first saw Psycho. I just know it was before grade school. My dad got away with a lot when I was that young. I'd seen a lot of the early Universal horror films, which those, by today's standards, even by the standards of when I was that young, are incredibly tame. Those didn't scare me much. He also let me watch the Bond movies before I went to grade school, which, again, the Sean Connerys and the Roger Moore movies, not terribly violent by the standards of the early 90s. I don't know what he was thinking when he, popped me. I don't know if he purposely popped me down to watch Psycho, if he just wanted to watch it and I happened to be in the room. But all I remember from that first time seeing it was the shower scene, and then Mrs. Bates turning around in that chair. And he had this book, and I think I've still got it somewhere, called Classics of the Horror Film. And the section on Psycho is literally just, it's that picture of Marion Crane reaching in the shower, and then Mrs. Bates. And so anytime I would flip through that book trying to look for stuff about Creature from the Black Lagoon or the Wolfman, that would pop up, and it's like, oh, cool, this is not scary at all. It was, I definitely reached double digits before I would be willing to take a shower. And then I was in middle school, I believe, when I finally sat down and watched Psycho with my dad and my cousin. And it was great because it's like, oh, cool. This is not as bad as, being 3 years old or however old it was. And it's like, this is a very good movie. And there's still moments where it's definitely tense, even to this day, where I watch it where it's tense, but like the shower scene is not as scary anymore now that I know what happens.
But so legend has it that Janet Leigh, I keep doing that, had no problem shooting it, but when she saw it, she became aware of how vulnerable you are actually in the shower, and wasn't able to take showers for the rest of her life. And I definitely was well into my 30s before I had a shower curtain I couldn't see through. I would basically just have multiple liners stuck together so that I could see at all times through the shower curtain. That was absolutely a thing for the long time.
And you are correct. That is actually, that story is on the Making of Psycho documentary, where she talks about that.
Which is, again, the brilliance of the score, right? Like, she's there for hours and hours doing that shooting. None of that's going to be a surprise to her. But when she sees it as we see it, it's freaking terrifying. It's
that score and the editing.
Yeah.
Because if you were to pause it and just go super slow, again, it's not, if you were to watch that scene in slow motion, it's like, it's very obvious that there's no contact being made. Mm-hmm. But it's the brilliance of those quick cuts.
And the sound of the impaling the melon.
Yes.
The shrieking strings, man. And score, it's freaking brilliant.
I should also point out, just to poke a little more fun at my dad, he actually did have a Mrs. Bates shower curtain that with the silhouette that he would put up for the month of October. So we had to deal with that for many years. So yeah, that movie has been like, it hasn't haunted me my whole life, but somehow it's been with me for most of my life, and it's just kind of weird. So now that we have talked about our personal experiences with Psycho, we've kind of dipped into this already, but let's talk about how much of a game changer that it was in 1960. We've already talked about, how this is the spoiler alert movie, and it's obviously not the first movie to have a major spoiler. Hitchcock movies had spoilers before. Vertigo has a great spoiler as you get close to the end of the movie, where you realize that she was never, where Madeline was dead the whole. I'm getting it all mixed up, but you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. North by Northwest, where Eve is actually is working for the government. He's got plot twists, but most of the time it's not someone dying, and it's not less than halfway through the film. That's the important thing here. And not a lot of movies do that today. Your plot twists come at the end. That's just how it works. You want to they want to keep your audience on the string until the end of the movie. So, can you think of any movies that have like a plot twist like that effective that early on?
Yeah. Citizen Kane is the first one I can think of, 41, because Kane dies right at the beginning, whispering Rosebud, and the whole movie you think you're looking for who this woman was in his life, not knowing the whole time what he's actually talking about. So that's the biggest, earliest plot twist that I can think of. But I also have Atonement had a quite um, the younger sister having betrayed and then changing the ending of what the life would have been. The Arrival twist, having the different timelines in a different,
That's a good one.
yeah. And then Planet of the Apes having two because they land in everything's apes, and then the end reveal of, but it's Earth.
That is after Psycho. That and Psycho have to be like two of the greatest classic spoilers of all time.
Oh yeah,
Like classic plot twist.
yeah.
I
Those are the ones I
had a little bit of a list of some aren't as significant as Psycho, but this one I don't think was as significant. But I thought a good one that had a good plot twist about halfway through was the 2009 Star Trek, because I think a lot of people went into that movie thinking this is going to be a prequel, and instead, halfway through they realize it's not a prequel; it's just an alternate timeline, and that was the whole plot of the movie: is that the villain changes the timeline. So really, it is Star Trek 11, and not just going back to the beginning. So I think that's it's a good twist. I'm going to push this one again. Parasite. I am not going to say anything about the end of Parasite because just watch it. Did you watch it yet? Oh my God, watch it. It's on Hulu. If you have Hulu.
I don't have Hulu anymore.
Oh.
But I will just rent it. There are so many movies I want to just own and then I'll have them and I'll watch them. But at this point I just need to start watching them.
Oh, speaking of which, don't buy Parasite just yet. It is, I believe it is going Criterion.
Early.
Speaking of.
Nice.
Christopher Nolan, generally his movies have a good plot twist at some point in them, at least the not Batman ones. The Batman ones, I'd say, have the least effective plot twists, except for maybe The Dark Knight. $1 Million Baby was one that had a massive, it's less of, I wouldn't say it's much of a gotcha plot twist, but it's a massive change in tone because you think it's going to be about a movie about her getting all the way to the championship and, like a Rocky film. And then the neck is broken and it completely changes the tone of everything. And it is, again, getting into depressing movie territory again. But yeah, that's one that very effective plot twist. Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, I'm going to say the early Shyamalan films. I haven't seen most of the later ones, but those first two had really good plot twists in them. Empire Strikes Back. Everyone knows that ending now, but that had to be a big deal back in 1980. I actually think the best plot twist of a recent movie, and this is a franchise we're going to talk about a lot because a lot of people know it these days, is Avengers Endgame. When in the first 15 minutes of the movie, they cut off Thanos' head. And you're thinking, okay, what are they supposed to do for the rest of the movie? They've won. They've won, right? But like, yeah, none of these movies kill off their lead character like at an early point in the film. It's just so weird. It's such a weird thing to do.
For me, it was the movie star. For me, it was a tongue-in-cheek. He had a wicked sense of humor, so I wouldn't doubt if that was also part of it. Is the only name in there, well known, was going to bring the people in outside of Hitchcock to come see the movie was Janet, and he's going to kill her off. He's going to kill off the movie stars. He's done with the movie stars. He's moving on. We're going to go over here now. And you're all going to go with me. We don't have a choice. Now we're going to focus on this thing over here. It's so good because then you're brought in so much into the actual storyline. We're not here to see what Grace Kelly is going to wear next. We're not here to see what witty thing Cary Grant's going to say next. we're here just for the plot, what's happening next.
And that actually is another great thing that makes it different from his 50s films, is that there's a little bit of humor in the beginning and it works. Like with Patricia Hitchcock's character. She's just delightful in that early scene. But once Marion is dead, there's almost no humor in this one. Like, at least not anything that's going to make audiences just laugh. Except for maybe, I think the sheriff's wife, maybe the closest you get for the rest of the film. But if you're laughing for the second half of that film, it's because you are uncomfortable as heck. Or you're relieved that you're not the person getting stabbed. It's just not an it's tonally very different, and I love that. It's interesting to talk about killing the movie stars, because in the movies he made after Psycho, I can't think of, like, Paul Newman might have been the biggest name that he ever put, and Julie Andrews may have been the biggest names that he put in a movie ever since, because Sean Connery wasn't a huge star yet when he did Marnie. He was just starting out as Bond. And Tippi Hedren was obviously a very new face.
A model, yeah. People knew her as, yeah.
So, yeah, he really, like, Grant and Stewart and Kelly, like, yeah, there was never one quite as big as them in a Hitchcock movie afterwards.
I don't think there's anybody as big as them ever. I love them. I love that he used them. I love that there's film on that. I mean, Jimmy Stewart, he gave Jimmy Stewart some fantastic stuff nobody else was ever going to give him. He was cast against type continually by Hitchcock, which was so great. I'm sure he had a freaking ball doing that. George Bailey's never going to get to be the bad guy, and yet he gets to be the bad guy. It's pretty awesome.
So let's also talk about how this literally changed the game for movie theaters, because before Psycho, you could buy a ticket to see a movie at any damn time you wanted to and just walk into the middle of the film. With the big plot twist so early on, Hitchcock didn't want people to do that with Psycho. So it became the rule. It became the norm. You have to buy your ticket and you have to go in at the beginning of the film, and no one will be, oh, excuse me, I have a cat trying to, that's my whiskey. You had to go in. You had to see it from the beginning. Like, that's a huge game changer. We would never think nowadays to just go to a movie right in the middle, or even 5 minutes in.
No, and I can't believe that was a practice. It seems like such a slap in the face to, any screenwriter trying to build an arc of the story. And it's just, because you'd come in whenever and you'd sit through until you came back to that place again, and then you would leave in the middle of it all over again. And that's crazy to me. That linear storytelling, there's a purpose to it. And I can't believe that it took until the 1960s for that to become a known and respected thing.
I mean, to be honest, though, I still see people back in the time before when you could go to the cinema. I'd still see it happen. I'd still see people walk in maybe 10 minutes into a movie, but 10 minutes seems to be the max that people show up late to a movie now these days.
But would you do it as a cinephile? Would you walk in 10 minutes? Yeah, no. We're here at the 20, man. We're not going to do that.
I would only do it if it was a movie that I was seeing twice and I was running late, or, something was, keeping me from getting there on time. Mm-hmm. If it was going to be something I was going to see for the first time and I got stuck in traffic or whatever, then no, I'd turn around.
Yeah. Or just wait for the next showing, which I've had to do a couple of times. But it's worth it to me. I want to see the whole arc. There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's weird to and I love that he would have they would have speakers of Hitchcock saying, 20 minutes until the next showing. that to me is something that we've kind of lost today, is that showmanship. But then again, theaters aren't the same as what they used to be. TV and home video have really kind of turned theater more into an industry. And that's not to say that the movies themselves have exclusively become an industry. They certainly have with Disney, and the way I love Marvel, but they do pump them out. Those are just meant to bring in audiences and make money. But that's why we have theaters like the Grand, where they will happily, put across their marquee, yes, we are playing Parasite. Yes, we are playing, this film that no one else will show. This amazing film that is going to win Academy Awards. Thank goodness for small theaters like the Grand that sort of maintain that sort of showmanship. I even love that they do raffles. Like, they really do love engaging with their audience.
They do. They do talkbacks. They do. There's all kinds of things. And then during their festival seasons, when they're running all of their original content shows for their festivals, they have huge amounts of interaction for the groups, talkbacks, and speaking to the screenwriter, speaking to the director, panel discussions. It's great. I love that.
Speaking of cinemas, I can't believe I didn't have this down in the itinerary. Have you had a chance to see Psycho on the big screen ever?
I do not believe so. I was just thinking the other day, the last Hitchcock I saw on the big screen was Vertigo, which is crazy insane on a big screen, so bright. And the thing I remember most is Kim Novak's extreme eyebrows. They're everywhere, everywhere, all over the screen. Quite distracting, actually. But yeah, I don't think I've seen Psycho. If I have, it's been a couple decades since I did.
I actually did. For the 55th anniversary.
Sweet.
They brought it back for the TCM Fathom events, which it really bums me out that that is supposed to be their big event for next month. And we are once again stuck. I'm grateful that we can watch it, on Blu-ray or, whatever on our TVs. But it's a great film to see on the big screen. That was my first chance to be able to catch a lot of, the weird quirks that Anthony Perkins pulls off. It's especially noticeable on a big screen. It's wonderful. And just to have that booming audio that you can only get in a movie theater. I tell you, that's the only thing that I can't do at home is I do not have a good sound system. I have for years been just having the sound come out of my TV, and it's like it's not the same as having the speakers behind you.
Yeah, I'm in an apartment, so that's never. I mean, I've got the sound, the bass and the soundboards, and I've got everything. I just can't use them like with good conscience. So someday I will have a home and I'll be able to bust it as loud as I want to.
Well, when you do, invite me over because I want to get that same audio experience. So the last thing I have here under the game changer is something Psycho did. It created a genre for film that didn't exist before, in a subgenre of horror, and that's the slasher film. It's hard to believe that there was not that subgenre didn't exist at that time, because now it is the most milked subgenre in all of horror. The three films I have listed here that are a direct influence from Psycho are Halloween, Friday the 13th, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And those films have 1 billion sequels. It's insane how much those have been milked. We'll talk about how much Psycho's been milked, which isn't nearly as much. But you've got TV shows like Criminal Minds, like you would not have Criminal Minds without Psycho. Did you ever watch Criminal Minds?
No.
It's a show about a team of FBI investigators, and they specifically investigate murder cases or cases where it's a sort of psychological. I believe they're called the behavioral analysis unit. So there's a lot of episodes of that show where it's like, oh, this character has a split personality, just like Norman Bates, and it's all those kinds of things, and they're almost all graphically violent as far as you can get on network television anyway. Yeah, I mean, it all goes back to Psycho. Like, nothing. And I mean, it's not even my favorite genre of horror, because most of the time it is just a guy with a knife. And that to me is boring, usually.
It did significantly change, though, because prior to that, all the major murders, it was noir, right? It's guns.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden is this drastic. So it is quite something that one film can do that.
And in noir, it's usually crimes of profit. They're trying to get the money, or they're trying to get the jewels, whatever. It's almost always like the Maltese Falcon. They're after an object. They're not out there to kill people. People die because they get in the way of the money.
The thing I want. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. With Psycho and Halloween, people die because the killer wants to kill, has some desire to kill. And it's all, and again, it's not a gun. It's almost always a knife. It's always intimate. It's close. It's brutal, and it's much more painful. But yeah, for me, with the exception of Psycho, the reason Psycho works for me as opposed to the other slashers is just because it's Norman Bates, because he's a character. Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees really aren't characters. They have their masks. They don't say a thing. They just kill, and they mostly kill people who are just young, horny teenagers, and that's it. Norman kills because he is young and horny. That's his problem.
And he has mother issues.
Yeah. So, and I'm not saying they're all bad. The first Halloween movie is actually really good, but they're just franchises that get milked to death, and they just try to find more ridiculous ways for these killers to kill. But it's almost always, again, going to be something to do with a sharp object. So, can you think of any slasher films you appreciate beyond Psycho? Because for me, it's tough.
I've literally never seen any of those on your list. I can't handle the blood context, and I'm into character analysis, and like you said, that's not what it's about. The thriller, what I love about Hitchcock is the mind games that he plays. I like that. I like trying to get into the philosophy head of this criminal, why they did what they did, in order to catch them, in order to understand them, in order to figure out why they're hitting the person they're hitting, or what the game, modus operandi actually is. I want to know the mystery of it, like in Agatha Christie. I don't want to see or pay attention to the murder. It's everything around it that I'm interested in. And that's what he was so good at. So I can't think of any of those guys. I do think Halloween was interesting in just the casting of Jamie Lee Curtis and how that's very purposeful.
Yes, actually, yeah.
That's a huge, literally passing the baton from mother to daughter, and there you go. Here's the franchise.
Actually, I did think of one that I do appreciate. I don't think of it as a slasher movie because it hasn't spawned a billion sequels. but it is, I think, a smarter film like Psycho, and that's Silence of the Lambs, which I brought up earlier. And it's really not as much, no one loves Silence of the Lambs for Buffalo Bill. Everyone loves it for Hannibal Lecter. And in Silence of the Lambs, you don't even get to see him do much killing. You get to see some of the gory aftermath, and it is gory, but it's Anthony Hopkins' brilliant performance and Jodie Foster. And actually that's, you talked about Psycho didn't win any Oscars. I think Silence of the Lambs was the movie that had to pick up that torch and tell the story that would win. I think it won the Big Five. So I think it's the closest. Silence of the Lambs is probably the closest a Hitchcockian film to receive such prestige. Mm-hmm. But again, that's it. You're absolutely right. It's about the psychological in that film, and that's what's fascinating. It is gory, and it if you don't like blood, you can get very squeamish in that one. But I would still recommend it for sure. If you're ever feeling brave, it's a great movie, just for Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins alone.
Oh, and I know their scene work is phenomenal, and I've seen bits of it. I've studied bits of it for school, and but yeah, I've never been able to make myself sit down and get through it. I think a lot of it is knowing the Buffalo Bill section of it. It's a lot. It's a lot.
So yeah, that's game changing. That's how game changing Psycho's been. It's a very important film. Let's talk about our favorite scenes in the movie. We've kind of dived a little bit into that. What would be your number one?
Yeah, I have no idea. There are beats. There's so many beats of it. And I've got 12, because they're so good from the opening sequencing. Seriously, Saul Bass designing to Herman's score, which nobody had ever heard anything like. Hitchcock called it 30% of the film. I mean, by the time he was done with it, he was ready to chop it down and put it into Hitchcock Presents to make an episode, until he heard the music, and that's what just tied everything together for him. And it's masterful. It's so good. I love the subliminal coding, the Marion's underwear being white and then black. The shower scene, washing herself clean of the crime when she's decided to go back and face the consequences. All of the birds, Crane is the name, the stuffed birds. She eats like a bird. And then, of course, the next film that he's doing is The Birds. So it's kind of funny that he's shooting this, well, obviously in pre-production or some sort of planning scheme of understanding birds. I love the inner thoughts of Marion as she's driving, fantasizing about finding the crime, and that same smile she makes is the smile that he makes at the end, that kind of sly, evil satisfaction smile. And I love that they both mirror that. I love the amount of silence that's in the film, letting actors do their thing. Shot frames, total infringement of space by the extreme close-ups, and the fact that Norman is very infrequently center frame. He's always kind of shoved over to a side somewhere, because he doesn't get to tell his story. His story is incomplete. It's not about him. It's about the ghost in the room. There's just so much in there. Norman's eye shot to her eye shot, the passing of time while she drives. It's a great passing of time sequence, actually, to keep it interesting, to keep that momentum moving. I love the props too. What stood out for me was the tear. There's a tear in the envelope, and the money is lying on the bed. And I just think it's such an interesting detail, along with the overtime wear and tear of the newspaper, and that the toilet is all chipped and has rings in it because it's an old shitty hotel. So there's so many little tiny pieces that I love. I can't pick just a moment, really.
It's tough. There's no one scene. You brought this up though. Someone asked, do you know the story of the toilet in the film?
I know that he made him shoot it, so there was no way to cut around it, so that they had to make it a major plot point to keep it in, because it's never been stateside anyway. There'd never been a
Yeah.
toilet on film. So I want this. Make sure we can't cut it out. It will be plot essential.
Yeah, it was Joe Stefano, the screenwriter, who wanted to put the toilet in the film because no American film. I say American. Some people think it may have been no film ever, but there's no way to know for sure there. But yeah, no American film had ever featured a toilet. And it's like, how is that a thing? It's like the toilet is the staple of the bathroom. You can't. So yeah, that it was Hitchcock and then the censors. Well, Hitchcock told Stefano, like, you have to give them a reason in the plot. And it's like, so yeah, they did. And then the censors were okay with it. And it's like, cool, that's great. It just adds that sense of realism. Like, it is crazy to look back on, some of these old movies that we love and to think that you don't necessarily see some of these things you see in modern films that should exist.
Yeah. Well, and that and I think for the first time ever, he clothes racked his actress. He always has Edith Head or somebody coming in to dress all of his leading ladies, and at this point, they just pulled her clothes off the rack and said, "That's what a secretary can afford. That's what you're going to wear. Period. Full stop." Which is great again, and adding to that realism of the situation. And it's not a beautiful hotel that's the size of an apartment. It's tiny, crappy room, shitty bed. Yeah.
Yeah, you make a good point there too. Like Marion Crane is the first leading lady who's not this elegant heiress. Grace Kelly always plays these, elegant, rich women. Or why can't I remember her name in Vertigo? I'm so sorry.
Novak?
Huh?
Kim Novak?
Yep. Kim Novak has to look glamorous because it's part of the ruse. You've got to get Jimmy Stewart's attention in that movie. Yeah, it really is. It's almost like Hitchcock finally made the working man's Hitchcock film. So that's actually, that's a good point. Yeah.
With his working crew, using his Hitchcock Presents crew members instead of hiring elsewhere. Yeah, let's just do it with the family.
Yeah.
It's very, it feels like a family film. It feels like when Joss Whedon, during the writer's strike, did Much Ado, in his backyard in a weekend or something. Just like, guys, we're going to make a movie. And they just did. That's what it feels like in the best of ways.
So going back to favorite scenes, I would say I definitely agree. One of the best scenes is Marion driving. I particularly think that her inner monologue would resonate well with even modern audiences, because in this day and age, you recognize even right away the character who's buying the house. He is a sleaze, absolute sleazeball. And there is I have no sympathy for him. And it's like, great, take his money. He kind of deserves it. So absolutely, I love that. And as the camera just gets closer and closer to her face with every little story she's concocting in her brain. And I love that basically echoes, that is what Norman is doing. He is also, hearing the voices in his head. And that just, once you realize that, that just makes their scene together in the parlor even better, because Norman really does know what she's going through. And it's wonderful. I also love the scene. I love the posts after the shower scene where Norman is cleaning up, because it is this long, drawn-out scene with no dialogue, and it is all on Anthony Perkins and just the little things he does. And, repeat viewings just sort of indicate like, okay, he's surprised, but mother inside his head also knows exactly how to fix this. Like I love the little detail of he doesn't carry the body to the car. He pulls the car closer up to the room so he doesn't have to drag the body so far. Like, if this were his first time doing this, he probably wouldn't think to do that.
Well, and that is something that I'm interested in because I have not seen any of the other Psychos, is we know he's killed 2 other women before. So is this old hat? Is this just the thing that he does? So now he knows this is his 3rd body that we know of. So that, yeah, that's come up in my head while I was watching it this time, of how much of this is practice work and how much of this is mom taking over and being like, no, you need to do this, because he's got interesting moments when he first looks at the body and backs up against the wall and you see his jaw moving and he's freaking out and he's thinking and his eyeballs are moving, and then everything stops and then he just like, okay, I got to do the thing, and then he goes in and does the thing.
I also love, and I'm not sure if I ever caught this before, but I definitely caught it when I watched it a few nights ago. Norman's first scene with Arbogast, and when Arbogast finally leaves, you have Norman standing on the right side of the frame, and as it's fading to black, you can see Mother smiling. I don't think I ever caught that smile before. And you know that's a Mother moment because Norman's just got to be relieved. Yeah. Mother is satisfied.
Yeah, he's the scared one that gets tongue-tied, and yeah, he's not up to the game, but she is.
Yep. Ugh. So this next part I have here, we've actually started talking about a little bit, and that's how Norman and Marion are based. They're kindred spirits. And we both talked about how one of the best parts about rewatching Psycho after seeing it the first time is looking back for those moments where Mother is present in Norman's scenes. We talked about the car scenes with Marion. Here's one. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but it's when she is in the ladies' room at the used cars with the used car salesman. And Hitchcock has it framed so that she's in a mirror. I don't know if that is intentional to show her the dual side of her or not, because obviously a mirror is something you can't get away with not having in a ladies' room. So it's also practical. But she is also dealing with the money at that point.
Yeah.
But the only reason I question that is mirrors aren't necessarily a trope that occurs much more throughout the film, except for maybe at the end when Lila sees herself in the mirror in Mother's room.
And then there's the rearview mirror on the car.
Oh, that's true.
And I'm trying to think if there's one in the opening scene or not. But I believe I had read at some point that everybody's seen in a mirror at some point except Norman.
Interesting.
I have to see if that is true, but there's so many things about this movie. That's the, hearsay versus the news. I would say if it's in frame, it's there for a reason. There's so many ways to get around it. And actually mirrors are complicated, especially back then when you can't just green screen everything out. Like you've got a whole crew behind that camera, and these are not small cameras back then either. So that's a lot of masking they have to do in order to have one in frame. I'm guessing if it's there for a reason. So that duality.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's Hitchcock. I should never question that. I love that somehow Norman is the first person in Marion's journey to California. That Norman is the first person that she trusts, because even though he's asking questions, he's not asking questions because he's suspicious. He just wants to talk. And even though she is still definitely trying to lie, and still kind of doing a bad job at it, that scene, talk about favorite scenes. That scene is just so good because the first person that she trusts is actually a complete stranger. One, I can't remember if it was on the Making of Psycho documentary I saw this, but someone had said in one of the documentaries, if you're going into this movie blind, you might be thinking this is actually going to be a love triangle. And it's going to be a movie about, is Marion going to choose Norman or Sam? But obviously that's not the case. But I think that's an interesting look at it because she does seem to have that connection. She does seem to actually have a stronger connection with him than she does with Sam.
I think it's interesting that she has her problems, but she seems to be able to, as soon as she witnesses Mother screaming at him, she seems to be able to suss out what his problem is and wants to kind of pump him for that information and help him out. And that's when Mother comes out pretty specifically. And she's totally along for the ride. She totally trusts him and everything. And the first time that she kind of is put off by him is when she says, put her someplace. And then his whole body changes, his whole energy changes, and he goes on a whole diatribe about, just put him away someplace and you just forget about him. And she's visibly, oh, okay. And it's such a different shift, and then shifts back again. That moment is really, really interesting to watch, and how many different layers he brings to it.
It's very similar later on. You never see Norman/Mother get defensive with Arbogast or with Sam until Mother is brought up. Mm-hmm. Norman doesn't mind at all being questioned about what Norman does, but as soon as Mom pops up, that's when he says, you have to leave. Mm-hmm. And like, Sam isn't even being cautious about it. Sam isn't even, Sam's not even supposed to know that there's a mother. He's doing a really bad job of being stealthy at that point. And then, that's when he gets hit on the head. And you still have to decide, your first time seeing this, you have to decide, are we rooting for Norman right here? Are we rooting for him to save Mother, or are we rooting for Norman to save Lila from Mother? Is that what we're rooting for? It's not until we finally see Mother at the end that we realize something's very wrong. Because that could have been the direction it went. This could have been a movie where Norman Bates is the hero and he saves Lila Crane. But nope, it's much better.
I don't think there was ever a moment where I didn't know. Prior to my watching, I already knew the reveal, so it wasn't a shock and awe moment. I wish I had that moment. I wish I would be able to, it's like watching Citizen Kane for the first time, all of those things that now are old hat, but it's the first time people have seen that. To be in that audience, to be the first ones to see, holy crap, that guy's, what the hell is going on here? It's quite something.
Well, it's not even because it's like been spoiled for us by fellow moviegoers, but it's been spoiled by parody and homage. Mm-hmm. Psycho in particular has been parodied, or I think in the very first season of The Simpsons, they do one where Maggie hits Homer on the head with a hammer and they play the Psycho music, and he spills a thing of paint that goes down the drain, and it's brilliant, but it kind of spoils the scene if you've never seen Psycho.
Right.
Like, at this point, for our generation and, the generation that came after, that first wave who saw it, like, it's just inherently something that we know about Psycho is that Norman Bates is the killer. You just can't escape it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we still love this movie, even though we knew everything about it, before.
It's art, man.
Yep. We've already actually talked a lot about cinematography, so I might jump over some of that. We've talked a little bit about close-ups. I do want to say I love the most prominent close-ups I think in the film are the police officer and Arbogast. Like, the police officer one is just scary.
Yeah.
And I know that has a lot to do with Hitchcock's fear of the police. And I feel like that may have been intentional because he wanted to, and you don't get that with Norman right away because those close-ups are so uncomfortable that these are the people you automatically don't want to trust.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's really nothing that Arbogast does that makes him seem like he's a distrusting person, but that close-up of him when he walks into the store, you go back to the police officer and you think, oh, okay, this is the long arm of the law, and the long arm of the law in this movie can't be trusted.
Well, and the law is supposed to go and find her and save her, so we shouldn't not be rooting for these people. And Hitchcock has a ongoing theme of doing that. He's very good at getting you to sympathize with his villains, at least for the moment.
Or, he is also very good at getting his heroes into the wrong types of situations, like Cary Grant in North by Northwest, where the law is, on the side of good, but, you still don't want him to catch Cary Grant because Cary Grant never did anything wrong. So he's very good at manipulating our expectations of who is right and wrong. Let's talk for a minute about Bernard Herrmann again, because one thing I noticed upon viewing Psycho this time around, modern audiences should know that back in the day, movies had title sequences where they showed the credits for most of the key people in the production, and usually it's writer, producer, and director are last. In this case, Bernard Herrmann's name is the one that comes before Hitchcock. That is very significant. I can understand maybe going ahead of the producer. I don't think producers had quite as big of a credit back then, but to put the composer before the writer for a movie is huge. And as you've said, Hitchcock knew how important this score was. It was 33% of this film.
He's doing the due diligence, but also, Gregory Peck going in after he saw the rushes for Roman Holiday and being like, you got to put her name up there with mine or I'm just going to look like an idiot. Like, I know what I know. You got to put it, and he does give that credit to Herrmann, which I love. And it's such an odd score. It's like nothing like it has ever happened.
All strings, I would have questioned it back then too.
Yeah.
And also, I think for me, Bernard Herrmann is just one of the best composers ever. There's something about the composers of that era that resonates with me much more than most of the composers in film today. There's some great ones. Don't get me wrong. John Williams always pulls something good out, but these days you don't get the orchestral score much anymore. It's going to be rock and roll. It's going to sound very modern.
I think and does some really interesting stuff. Danny Elfman.
Yes, Danny Elfman also. And Danny Elfman, of course, is just synonymous with Tim Burton.
Yeah.
With that very strange style.
Mm-hmm.
For Psycho, I love that the opening theme, which I feel is also kind of like Marion's sort of suspense theme, which is the music that they play while she's driving. That's gone once Marion's dead. From then on out, you get some of the more intimate stuff, but that big booming main title scene is done.
I caught it one other time, just the high pitch, not the boom, 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 boom at the end, but the high pitch after she turns Mother around and screams. And she hears a scream behind her, which is Mother/Norman. Then you hear the shrieks one more time, but not with the full bass sound that's included with the usual.
I'm gonna have to listen for that one next time.
Yeah.
But yeah, and of course, we've talked about it so much already that shower scene is just, it's perfect. Even my dad would just listen to Bernard Herrmann. You know, he just had the best of Bernard Herrmann, and even without the film, the shower music is just horrifying. Because you see it in your head. More than anything else that I think Herrmann has done, that sound is the sound of a knife stabbing someone.
Yeah. That everybody knows what that means. Everybody knows.
Yep.
You don't have to have seen this movie. It's just zeitgeist knowledge. It's just known.
Just, I don't think a physical feeling, like an actual sensation, like a painful sensation, is nearly as visceral as that sound captures. That sound captures it more than any other sound. That is the sound of a knife plunging into your chest. And
such a high pitch too in a movie theater with that much heft behind the speaker system. I can imagine that's quite fingernail on a chalkboard also, just startling.
Yeah.
Because she's just washing and it's just water and you see the form, but you don't hear anything until the pull. And then it's immediate. Yeah. So good.
I'm going to jump over the section on reception. We've already talked about how successful this film has been and how critics hated it back in the day. We've also talked a little bit about how Psycho's different from the other films, but I find it really interesting that of all of Hitchcock's films, this is the one that does pop out at Halloween time. Norman Bates has been... they've created action figures of Norman Bates in the same line as the monster from The Thing, or Cronenberg's The Fly. Like, he is synonymous with that level of horror, and I find that very interesting. Because no other Hitchcock movie, with the exception of probably The Birds, can really be equated with Halloween and that feeling of like horror films. I wish he'd done more like that, because he was absolutely right. You can make a good prestige horror film. He was the first director since James Whale to do it. It took almost 30 years after Bride of Frankenstein for someone to really, not to discount some of the Val Lewton films from the 40s, which are very good, but no one talks about Cat People in the same breath that they do as, you put Frankenstein and Psych, you can mention those in the same breath.
Sure.
But yeah, it really was. It was the first horror film in such a long time to really hit that prestige level. And I just wish that he'd done more.
Well, I love that it was a passion project for him, that he was willing to do it at nobody's going to back him, which is crazy because he's Hitchcock. So, why wouldn't you back me? But like the fact that he gave up his usual salary $250,000, which his standard salary at the time, and he waived that in lieu of 60% profits, which meant he made $15 million, which is over $131 million today on inflation. And he bought the rights for the book from Block for $9,000 flat. And he just wanted to make it, so he did it. He did it with his crew. He did it with his team. He did it on a crappy budget with black and whites and parts and pieces of other sets shoved together to build the house, and he made his movie his way, and it's awesome.
I really love that the tables turned and he really did end up getting the better end of the deal with that. Like, you never would have thought that. Like, that's insane. That would be the equivalent of like Robert Downey Jr.'s negotiations for, his Iron Man films today. Except there was no way of knowing that Psycho would have been so successful.
Yeah. No, and he didn't care. It's like, what do you need me to do to make this movie? Just give me the money to make the movie. I'll waive my salary. Fine. I'll take this instead. Give it to me. And he wasn't broken up about it, in editing process when he's like, maybe we'll just turn it into an episode of Hitchcock Presents. Like, he was sort of fine with it. He just wanted to make what he wanted to make, how he wanted to make it. He wanted to make it as disturbing as he wanted to, something nobody had seen before. And it's really that, that George Clooney making these movies over here in order to have money so he can make this movie over here. They're still having to do that, to get the backing to make the movies. The only people I think that don't have to do that, like, ever, are the Coen brothers. It seems like they've just been the Coen brothers from the beginning. They do it their way. Period.
I would say, the Coen brothers, and I would again bring up Wes Anderson, I think, too.
Oh, yes.
But you're absolutely right. Not enough directors get to make that film the way they want to. I would say Ryan Coogler lucked out with Black Panther, with Marvel letting him make the movie that he wanted to make too, because that's actually a fun example of a director going from a low budget film that he wanted to make to making a high budget film that he wanted to make. It's usually, like you said, it's usually the reverse. You have to do that big Hollywood thing and then take all that money that you just made.
Yeah. And pump it in the little guy.
Yep. So I want to talk a little about the legacy of Psycho sort of within the Psycho universe. And I know you said you haven't seen any of the sequels. I've only seen the end of Psycho 2 and parts of Psycho 4.
So what do they do? Are they prequels? Are they?
4 is. Well, 4 kind of is. 2, Vera Miles comes back for 2. Anthony Perkins is back for all 3.
Oh.
But he's the only one who came back for all 3 films. From what I can remember of 2, so Lila Crane Norman is released after 22 years. He's declared sane. But of course, Lila Crane, who is now Lila Loomis, wants him to be put back in the institution. And long story short, she and her daughter gaslight Norman into believing that his mother is still in his head. But this whole time, there also is someone else who is calling Norman, claiming to be his mother. And at the end of the film, one of the characters actually shows up at the end and says, "Norman, I'm your real mother. And Norma Bates was my sister. I was put in an institution and you were given to her."
Oh.
Whether or not this is true is probably up to the interpretation of the audience, but she ends up being, at the very end of the movie, the only person that Norman kills. Everyone else is killed by either Lila or her daughter Mary or another side character. Like, Norman doesn't really kill anyone till the end, but it's that one killing that actually pushes him back over the edge, and at the end of the movie, he does start actually hearing Mother again.
How does he do in the? Is he as articulate with his acting choices throughout the rest of them?
I couldn't tell you. I
Okay.
couldn't tell you again because I've only seen the end of 2,
Oh, okay.
and it's been several years. It's probably been about 10 or so years. I've never seen 3, and in 4, he is. It takes place during modern times, and he's on the phone with Norman's on the phone through the whole movie with like a phone psychiatrist, I think, and he's telling her the story of his mother, and you get to see flashbacks, and it's Henry Thomas from E.T. as young Norman Bates, and Olivia Hussey as Norma.
Oh,
So, and I've seen parts of that, but I just don't remember it very well. But I do know that none of the films were ever as successful as the original. And they kind of followed the same pattern as the Jaws films with the law of diminishing returns, where, by the time Psycho 2 was out, critics had finally come around to saying, yes, Psycho is brilliant. And I think it was actually Roger Ebert who said Psycho 2 is, it's competent, it's good, but it lives in the shadow of 1. And then I believe 3 and 4 are just considered terrible. But I mean, like Jaws, how do you top the first one? You don't, especially without Alfred Hitchcock.
yeah. What do you think about what was the show with Freddie, where it's young Norman?
With Freddie Highmore.
Yeah.
Yes, and Vera Farmiga.
I want to watch that at some point.
I want to watch it too.
Yeah.
I think my dad watched the first 4 seasons, and the 5th season, I believe, actually catches up to Psycho and has Marion Crane.
Wow.
But I never started watching it. I think it's on Netflix. I think I have it in my queue. I might be wrong, but if it is, that's great, because that is something that actually got some pretty positive responses from critics and audiences.
Yeah. Well, both actors are on point, so
Yep.
I'm going to assume if they're going to sign on it, they've got some good material to work with there.
So, yeah, and I think the 5th season is where it ended where Psycho ends. So it basically, ended. I'd say it ended where it should have, where the movies probably should have as well. Have you
Yeah.
have you seen the 1998 remake?
No.
This
Is that the
is
shot one? No.
Yep. It is the number one argument to, if you're on the side of don't remake a movie, that is the number one movie you would pick, because yes, it is a shot for shot remake, and there's no point in doing a shot for shot remake when the original is so good. If you're going to remake a movie, remake it and put your own spin on it, or take a bad movie that you love and remake that and do something good with that. Don't take a great film and just literally do that. That is I think it's brilliant if you are a film student and you do that as a project for your class. You want to show how you understand how this works, but that's not something that you show to audiences, almost 40 years after the original and say, look at me, I can do it too. It's it's ridiculous. I would not recommend it. And it sucks because I would say they got a decent cast, but even then, it's Viggo Mortensen as Sam, and this is before Lord of the Rings. Anne Heche as Marion, Julianne Moore as Lila. So you've got 3 pretty good actors in there. I definitely would question the casting of Vince Vaughn as Norman. I think they could have gotten someone better for that.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, this film just shouldn't exist anyways. I think it works in the context of Bates Motel because you had something else that was leading up to it, and they took an entire film, or an entire story in the case of the book, and spanned it over the course of a season. So they obviously expanded on the story somewhat. So that's putting your own fresh spin on it. So I'm really interested to see how Bates Motel turned out. For my gamer friends out there, I want to bring up Resident Evil Code Veronica, which is the fourth game in a zombie shooter series, where you wake up on an island, and one of the first people you meet dresses like he's living in the past, speaks with a very high-pitched voice, and then you get through this military facility and you look up on the hill and there's a house, and I kid you not, it is the house from Psycho. And then you finally find out like what's going on with this guy, and he has been dressing up as his sister and pretending to be his sister. And I remember playing that when it was new. I think this was before I'd even seen Psycho. This would have been the spring of 2000. But I knew already. It's like, this is Psycho. It's like, it's crazy to think how that movie, gets into so many different things. And typically it's the shower scene.
Oh yeah.
But that doesn't happen in this game. They take everything else. But I brought up the shower scene, and I got to say, I love the shot of Marion, of her eye, just pulling back.
Yeah.
That, and just knowing how incredibly difficult that was for everyone.
Yeah. It's an insane, extremely slow pull out, just so slow. And you can see water droplets around her, and like, don't blink, don't blink. I also love the ending shot of him looking up and the skeleton of Mother kind of coming through his face. It's a brilliant ending. And I'm also interested in that most people don't like the gigantic psychiatrist blow off in the end of the third act to kind of explain everything. But I'm trying to think of how much mental illness had been spoken of. It's kind of very not the thing to talk about. And I know I'd seen a couple of things in the 50s, like The Three Faces of Eve with Joanne Woodward, where she played a real woman, I can't remember what her name was, who had multiple personalities. So there's a couple of things in the 50s and early 60s that had touched on the mental illness side of things, but I think that's why they had him there, to really focus on the mental illness. And what I did appreciate is that they didn't turn the transvestite, the man wearing a woman's clothing, into making that part of what makes him a villain. They're like, no, that's not what's happening. This is what a transvestite is, which is a different term than we know of it today. But the fact that they never once said, oh yeah, and also this is what makes them sick. It's like, no, this is what his issue is. And I do appreciate that. And I don't think they would have been able to, at that time, maybe they felt they needed to give that information to the audience because it was something that wasn't spoken about.
I agree. 1960, as we had discussed earlier, most crime films before Psycho were noir, where the motivations were, in front of your face. This type of thing hadn't been dealt with that much in film. So yeah, I completely agree. This is something that in 1960 audiences, for lack of a better term, had to have beaten over their heads. Mm-hmm. Now,
maybe because again, we're looking at it in a lens from forward, because this was so new and so shocking. Maybe the studio felt it was necessary to kind of explain, because if you didn't explain, if you just cut it and it's the ending and we're pulling the car out of the swamp and that's it, like, what is that going to screw with people's heads? Like, what level is this going to mess with people? And I'm wondering if that was the reason why they wanted that in there.
Well, and as depressing of an ending as it is compared to other Hitchcock films, it does give you that sense of closure that other films get. Because yeah, if you did cut from, the scene in the fruit cellar to, I don't know how else they would have done it back then, to, because you have to have the scene with Norman in the cell
Yeah, he
with the
has to be
blanket.
caught, and
Something's got to lead to that.
that was by censor standards. The villain has to be caught. Like, the villain has to be caught and punished. So if you killed somebody, you have to be killed or you have to be caught. Like, that was just US standards. So we still would have had the cell moment, just without the psychiatrist speak.
Yeah.
I just wonder if that wasn't part of the reason.
All right, so we're gonna move on to the last topic before trivia, and that is, you and I talked a little bit about this. So for the first time in 60 years, with the new release on both Blu-ray and 4K, the uncut version of Psycho is available to watch on home video. So I just want to make it clear to all you watchers out there, this is not a Lord of the Rings or a Blade Runner instance where, hours of content was cut, or even entire scenes. This is basically a case of the first wave of audiences to see this in theaters got a slightly more uncensored version, because censors back then were much more strict than they are now. I don't even think this film, when it was released, the R rating didn't exist. It was completely different. So, these days, this film is rated R. And that's actually, it's a very tame R by today's standards. But so what you're getting is, for those of you who have seen the film and would know what to expect, in the scene where Norman is watching Marion undress, there's a shot of her removing her bra. And that's actually, that moment is also, you can see that on the Making of Psycho documentary, which is also on the disc. After Norman pulls Marion's body out of the tub and puts her down onto the shower curtain, there's just more shots of his bloody hands, very much more close up, just a few seconds. And then when he stabs Arbogast, after Arbogast falls down the stairs, it's a solid 3 or 4 stabbings. And actually, this may have been a good cut because, especially on a big screen in nice high def, you'll notice as he continually stabs Arbogast, the knife is never bloody. And there is never a sound of stabbing like there is with the shower scene. It is just stab, 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 no sound effect. So it actually, the way it is in the cut version, you could argue is better. But I will say that
you're buying seconds
yeah,
on top of moments that were already there to begin with. So it's nothing revelatory or anything.
Yeah, nothing takes away from the plot. Nothing takes away from character development. I do appreciate that this version exists and made available because it is Hitchcock's vision of the film. It's, this is, for all intents and purposes, the director's cut. Like I said, it's not like Lord of the Rings where, people always say, oh, the extended version is better. Well, the theatrical cut is what Peter Jackson wanted for theaters. The extended version is just, look at all this stuff that we have, let's throw it back in.
Or 15.
That's not the case here. Yeah. So this is, and again, it's seconds. You're missing seconds. If you've seen the film several times, like Daya and I have, you'll definitely pick up on it. If this is your second or third time seeing this, if you've seen the cut version, you probably won't recognize any of it. So it's great that this exists, and I wish that more films of this era and prior had been preserved, because there's so many films that got cut for censorship reasons, or because back then you couldn't have a movie that was 2 hours long. So much was cut. There are several versions of the 1925 Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera, and no one can decide which is the definitive version. I'm glad we can do that with Psycho. So I hope that's a thing that we get more of with more films down the line. Whew.
I'm just really thankful that they're putting them on Blu-ray. A lot of the time, the prints that make it to Blu-ray are supremely grainy, and you can tell it's, you know, direct from video to it. At least it's saving the print. But for 4K, they're going to have to go in and they're going to have to clean it. That's my question. The 4K, how does film content, the blacks and the small detail pieces, how do those show? Pretty tight, pretty clean?
Oh yeah, it's very clean. The only shot to me that looked like it hadn't been cleaned up was actually that shot in the uncut version of Norman's hands.
Okay.
And that could just be because the original print that they had was badly damaged, or it could just be in my head that it's a new shot and it feels out of place. You know, it may take one or two more viewings. Oh man, I'll have to watch it again. I don't know. But yes, this is a very, very, you know, I will preface this. I am not an expert on, you know, on 4K remastering or anything like that. But I do think it looks very good.
No, but you would know if it was just a shitty transfer, you would know. It would be obvious.
Oh yeah.
Got several Blu-rays that's what they did, and you can tell when you pop the Blu-ray in versus the ones where they spent time remastering, and that is a significant difference in, you know, as a kid, I had, you know, a TV this big, all grainy and whatnot, so getting a lot of these films, I'm picking up things I've never seen before because I don't have a giant screen, but I'm rocking like 55 inches, I think, and high def, and you can see so much detail that in a lot of cases I've read in essays when they've remastered the prints that you're seeing things that the original audiences didn't see because the film quality wasn't as good as we're able to reel it in and get it, especially on black and whites, where that depth of field vision all the way to the back we can see on the noirs and everything, and it's beautiful. There's some beautiful, like Casablanca and Maltese Falcon, and you can see some amazing work the cinematographers did.
I think it's also important to point out too. You talked about watching stuff on a small TV.
Yeah.
And I'm going to assume that this was how you experienced Psycho the first time, because that's how I experienced it, was VHS.
Yep.
For those of you out there who don't know VHS, oh, you did not miss anything. We thought we had it good with VHS. Then we got DVD, and then we got Blu-ray, and then we realized that DVD was just VHS that you didn't have to rewind. Because, you know, except for, unless it was a new movie, like some DVDs of old movies were not that good. They were still grainy or tearing or what have you. It was, yeah, it took high def to get most classic films to finally look the way they should.
Yeah. Well, and upon viewing, you're deteriorating your film because it's actual film. So, I mean, you know, and I don't know how many times I had to take the back off of the VHS and rethread the entire thing and retape it because it snapped on the rewind, you know, like,
yeah,
those are some days. So anytime I could buy them, even if they're not the greatest print, just to get it on a disc where it's not going to deteriorate further was really important. So yeah, the remasters, anybody spending time doing that, that's one of those, if I had millions of dollars, I would love to throw some money at UCLA or whoever's doing it to make sure they keep doing it, preserve these films.
And Psycho has made the list for preservation, so it's safe. I would imagine most of Hitchcock's most prominent films have been. But really, just every film should be. Every film should be. Well, I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there are some films out there that were made some certain propaganda films that we don't need to preserve. But otherwise,
Yeah, yeah.
otherwise, let's just hang on to most of this stuff. Even if it's not considered appropriate by today's standards, it's always important to view these old films with a critical eye to know what it was like back then.
Yeah, the history involved. I'm glad that they're doing things like for Gone with the Wind, of putting a preface at the beginning of, keep in mind this is a historical, made in a different time about a different time. It's a lot of inappropriate characterizations of people. But to me, the solution is not just wiping them off of the planet. It's keeping them, and then by all means having the preface card and having discussions about the appropriate and non-appropriate level of what it's about. But yeah, save films.
That's how we learn, and that's how our motion pictures evolve, and how we can make them much more representative of the world around us now.
Mm-hmm.
Woo! This has been a crazy, awesome conversation. But I think it is time for us to start wrapping up, because we are at about 2 hours. So here we are with trivia. So we stand right now. Sarah is in the lead with 3.
Not even on the board.
Andrea and Marit are on the board with 1 apiece. This is going to be some Hitchcock trivia. So this should be at least, again, within your interest. So I hope I don't stump you too badly. At the same time, it's fun to stump the panel. So the question today. So Alfred Hitchcock had wanted Vera Miles for the leading lady in a previous film before Psycho, but she became pregnant and therefore unavailable for the role in which film? Was it A, Rear Window, B, To Catch a Thief, C, Vertigo, or D, North by Northwest?
Fred, I feel like I knew this once upon a time. Was it North?
No, it was not. The answer is Vertigo, the role that ultimately went to Kim Novak.
Dang it.
Oh, dear. We're going to get you on the board at some point.
It's so bad. I don't know, I panic. So this was her OU one. She had to do this for something. I can't remember why, but she was indebted to either the studio or Hitch or somebody. I can't remember who owned her.
I believe it was Hitch, but I wouldn't quote me on that. I'm getting that not from IMDb trivia or anything like that. I actually, from something we forgot to talk about, which is the 2012 film Hitchcock, which all I'll say about that movie is, have you seen it?
Yeah, I saw it on the plane going or coming from London. That's the one with Hopkins and Mirren and Scarlett, right?
Yep. All I'll say about that film is it's occasionally entertaining, but I would not use it as a reference for the actual making of Psycho for a lot of details, because there's a lot of stuff that is dramatized, and they definitely in that movie try to make it look like the book Psycho is about Ed Gein, which it is not. So if you ever watch the 2012 film Hitchcock, go in, know you're getting a great performance out of Helen Mirren, and some great performances out of everyone else, but Helen Mirren really rocked it in that movie.
Well, and that's what I really enjoyed, is that Alma Hitchcock was hugely necessary in his work and does not get enough credit. Hitchcock was a partnership. The brand of what he was and what he did was, everything went through her. She had an outstanding eye and kind of wicked sense of humor, and I don't know why she put up with his weird masochistic shit with his leading ladies, but she did. This is all to say that that movie does give her, and probably because Mirren's playing it, so there's no choice but to give it gravitas, to make sure that you know how much of an essential she was to his working pattern systems and his art, and that she was a huge influence of that as well. I did like that part.
All right, and on that note, we're gonna call this episode finished. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Remember, you can always send any questions, comments, or your trivia to fishislandsseesall@gmail.com. Dea, thank you as always for joining me on this adventure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.